virtual hello to everyone attending Gatsby Days online. Thanks for coming. My name is Blaine Kasten. I am a staff software engineer on the core team at Gatsby, and I work on supporting and building new features for Gatsby. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about something new that we're building. It relates to pages and routing. So first, to set the stage, when you're building sites with Gatsby, a vitally important part is to consider the routing structure, what pages exist, and how they are built. With Gatsby, we have a couple mechanisms for doing this. You can create pages in the file system by creating a React component inside of your source pages directory. At build time, these components get turned into pages at expected URLs. This is great for things like static content or even rendering a page that lists out all the data in a collection from your GraphQL server. But there are a few key and common use cases that aren't currently possible with the file system. So in Gatsby version 1, we introduced a low-level API, createPage, to accomplish any task related to building pages. It's a very powerful and flexible API. It is like our Swiss Army knife, but it is meant to be an advanced feature. Unfortunately, it was actually a requirement for some common use cases. One use case that currently requires jumping into Gatsby Node is if you wanted to create a page for individual items in a collection. Like in this example, we have a page that renders out a list of products. It's under source pages products index.js, and it generates a URL at website.com/products. It probably does this by using Gatsby's page queries. But if we wanted to have a page for each individual product, we have to go to Gatsby Node. Here's how this would be achieved today. In Gatsby Node, you export a createPages function. Here you can query for your data, in this case our products, then loop through each of the products, creating a page at the URL of /product/the product's name, with some reference to a component that will render this. This isn't terribly hard to do, but it's also not intuitive. This isn't the place that you would think about going to create pages. We've always desired to make building complex apps easy and intuitive, as well as our common mantra of being fast and accessible. So today we have an exciting announcement. But before revealing, let's look at one other use case that isn't easily doable today, but is actually common in our users' applications. And that is, how do I make client-side routing? We see this come up quite often in our GitHub issues. Complex apps almost always include some aspect of client-side routing. It could be for things like user accounts, or looking at past orders in a database by some identifier. Setting this up has confused many of our users. Today, again, it requires jumping into Gatsby Node and using, this time, the matchPath property on the createPage API. This will then create a static page with a dynamic URL segment and pass that ID to the component, which you can do something with at runtime. But again, this is not the place that you would expect to go to think of building this page. So back to our announcement. We are working on a suite of new APIs and conventions to make the file system the primary way for building pages. Don't worry, the createPages API is not going away. In fact, everything that we're building is actually built on top of that low-level API. So let's see this in action, revisiting our two previous examples. But first, a quick warning, all of these APIs are still in development, and what you see here may change, but the general principles and goals will still exist. Let's first look at our example of having a client-side route to look at past orders. To recap, this is how we achieve it today in Gatsby Node. And this is how we had the file system set up before. Instead of jumping into Gatsby Node, now we can create a file with a special marker to tell Gatsby that there's a dynamic URL segment. This component generates a URL at /orders/:ID, which is dynamic and given to the component at runtime. Then you write React code just like you're used to. The dynamic URL segment will come through your props on a key called params. Then it's up to you what you want to do with it. You can go and fetch your order from your database. There are actually a lot of interesting things happening in this space right now relating to things like suspense from React. Remix had a great demo of integrating their fetching data built into the router all behind the scenes to give a nice experience. We really expect to expand on this API in the future and improve the way data can be loaded and rendering works. But with these new APIs and features, it will dramatically simplify creating client-side routing. So that's how you do client-side routing. Now let's look at our other example. To recap our other example, we were using Gatsby Node to query for data and loop through each of the items to create a page. And this is how we had the file system set up before. Instead of jumping into Gatsby Node again, we create a file with a special marker for the URL segment. It looks very familiar, and is much like the client-side routing. However, in this example, we don't want to fetch the data on the client. We actually want to fetch the data at build time and generate a page for each product. So let's look at the component. This file will look very familiar if you've used Gatsby and you've built page components. There's one primary difference here though. The export uses a special API from Gatsby, createPagesFromData. This is a macro that tells Gatsby that you want to create this product component for every entry in the data resolved by the second argument, which is a type from your GraphQL schema. The string here can be a couple different things. All product is the simplest case, but you can even include filters onto it to limit what pages are built, or in the future, you'll be able to paginate too. So if your data set had the following records for products, a burger, a chicken, a hot dog, at build time, we would generate static assets and routes that would look like this: /product/burger, /product/chicken, /product/hot dog. And this is the power of Gatsby. We're able to generate static resources at build time and not at runtime. This is great for our users. I personally love how easy it is to get readable names in the URL instead of database identifiers that we see commonly across the web. So that's collection routing. These are two very important use cases that are going to become dramatically simpler. Our aim is to make building complex apps easy and intuitive, and we're doing that by unifying routing to the file system. We love this because now at a glance of your file system, you're able to see what routes your site has. So if you want to try it out, we have a canary release that we've been testing against. Just run yarn install or npm install Gatsby at unified routes. And we also have an RFC that we would love your feedback on to get these APIs right. If you want to follow me along, I'm found almost anywhere on the internet at /Blaine Kasten. And that's all, folks. Thanks for coming. Have a good Gatsby days.